Okay, so now we're going for the English video,
Yes.
right? For the people who want to learn English.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about something that happened to me at work with a friend of mine. And I guess it's an example of words that different English speakers in different countries use. And on this occasion, I had said something to a friend at work, something about an advertisement that I'd seen in a newspaper or a magazine or something like that. And she asked me, advertisement? What are you talking about? What is that word? And I said, when you see something in a newspaper or a magazine that's promoting something, it's like an ad or something. And she said, you mean advertisement? And I said, no, I mean advertisement. And she said, I've never heard of the word. We don't say that in America. No, she was joking, but she was serious also. She was like, I don't know what advertisement is. I said, well, it's the same thing, but we use advertisement that has an S, and the emphasis is on the second syllable, whereas in advertisement they use a Z, and the emphasis is on the third syllable. So it was all very confusing. And for me, like, to say advertisement sounds very strange. I guess if I hear it, I know what it means, but I would never say advertisement. And I guess it's a good example of two people that speak the same language, but who use a different. Well, it's the same word, but they pronounce this word in a different way, and they spell it differently, and the emphasis is on different syllables. And I think there are many examples of that in English across Australia, England, United States, and I'm sure it's the same in Spanish across different Spanish-speaking countries where things are pronounced a little bit differently, maybe spelt a little bit differently, or whatever. And I guess what it demonstrates is that there's a lot of fluidity and flexibility in how language is used, and it doesn't mean that what you're saying is incorrect, it's just different.
Right.
For the most part, given that I live in the USA, I do try to adapt to the English that is used here. I mean, it's all the same language, so I understand it. People understand me for the most part. But there are certain words that I might use in Australia that I don't use here.
Okay. But now, going back to the word advertisement. So you never heard that word in Australia or in England?
No. So, and I guess that why it was interesting for me is because for the most part, I try to use the words that people use here. That was one where I hadn't adapted. I hadn't changed my vocabulary. I was still using the word that I know from Australia. And it was the first time that someone said to me, what is that? Whereas most other times I use the words that people use here. So I don't encounter that confusion. So it was a reminder that, I still have some attachment to my Australian English. But beyond that, I guess my point was that it's not wrong to use the words that you grew up with. You just have to be mindful of the fact that in certain settings people won't immediately hear them or understand them. So there is a need to adapt when you're in a different setting. And I'm sure that will be the same in Spanish.
It is. It is the same.
I think it's even more complicated in Spanish because there are more countries that speak the language, so the variation is more significant from one country to the next in terms of the words people use for different things. Like, the words you might use for a shirt, you might have to be 5 different words for it. Whereas, England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the variation isn't as great, but it certainly exists.
So the variation between New Zealand, Australia, England is not so big.
I don't think it's that great, but there are examples.
Right.
Like, for example, that one, advertisement, that is a difference. And both words are correct. But in America, I guess, it makes more sense to say advertisement, even though for me it's a bit strange. Like, for example, in Australia we say tomato. Here I do say tomato in America, just because tomato now sounds weird.
What about in England? How would they pronounce it?
Tomato.
The same as in Australia?
Yeah, but here it's tomato. And I could think of many, many examples, but it was just that one example with my friend that struck me the most because she actually stopped me and said, I don't know what you're saying. I know
Yeah,
what it
it's.
means.
I also remember. I actually have another student who is. She is from Australia as well, and once she said the word mate,
Mate?
mate. But we were talking about food, so we were doing Spanish, and we were talking about food, things
Right.
that she liked,
Right.
and she was telling me, "Oh, I don't like mate." I said, "Mate." It's
Oh, her
mate.
pronunciation?
Pronunciation
She was
of
saying meat as in
meat.
M-E-A-T.
Exactly.
Right. Meat,
So,
I don't like meat. I don't know, something like that.
yeah, but pronunciation is totally different. Mate.
Yeah, it might have.
That's the way it's pronounced in England as well, or is it?
I mean, there's so many different accents. It's hard to like
hard to
generalize.
tell, right?
But
So how would you say in your Australia?
meat,
Meat.
I don't like meat.
So, but the pronunciation is different at first.
I mean, yeah, for me, I don't know what she was trying to say. She was trying to say
So
something.
she was saying meat,
meat.
meat. But she said
Meat.
mate.
Mate.
Meat.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could, think about it. There's lots of different examples, but yeah, I just wanted to talk about that one that happened to me.
So would you say that in Australia, people in different regions have a different accent, or the accent is the same all over the country?
Yeah, not really. We talked about that once before, and there's not a lot of regional variation in Australian accents. There are some distinctions between urban and rural and stuff like that, but across the country, it's not a lot of great variation. It's not like in America where there's a lot of different regional accents.
Very interesting. But we also have that in Spanish. We also, for instance, I'm going to give an example. El verbo coger,
See,
coger. In some places, it's not used.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, in some places, it has like a double meaning.
right,
It means
right.
something totally different.
Right, and that's just talking about meanings. I mean, accents in Spanish vary tremendously also from one country to the next, and even within countries. So yeah, that's a whole other aspect of language that's very interesting. Are those variations that occur within the language? Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks.